Ultimately, the state would see an influx of Irish railroad workers, Scottish quarrymen, and a whole host of European migrants in the ensuing decades, but it remains the third most English state in America. Hello, I'm Lawrence and I'm on a quest to uncover all of the memos that Britain and America lost in the pond, and one of those memos pertains to people. People come in all shapes and sizes, and given the nature of the human tendency to expand its horizons, people also come from different backgrounds. Culturally speaking, very few countries on Earth embody this more than the United States, where multiple waves of immigrants, myself included, touched down at the hallowed docks of Ellis Island, or in my case, Indianapolis Airport. The point is, America is made up of a wide variety of ancestral groups. I'll not list them all here, rather I'm going to home in on one ancestral group in particular, my own. You see, as of the 2000 US Census, a whopping 24 million Americans self-reported having English ancestry, that is, having descendants who originated wholly or partly in England. Now, perhaps it shouldn't come as much of a surprise that English was the fourth highest group on that very census, given the waves of English migrants between the 17th and 19th centuries. In fact, when you consider the role that English pioneers and others played in the eventual formation of the United States, it's actually astonishing we didn't place higher, but there might be a good reason for that, and it is this. Self-reported data is not always entirely reliable. For instance, demographers found that many Americans of English stock tended to self-report American ancestry instead of English, and in cases where a person was highly attached to more than one European background, a person might report their more recent non-English ancestral group. In all, demographers believe that English ancestry is wildly underreported, but I've never been one to sniff at a sample size of 24 million, because that's almost the population of Australia. So today, in this very video, let's indulge the 2000 census and imagine for a moment that there are 24 million Americans whose descendants were English. Who are they? What are their stories? And where are they? If we could create a map of English ancestry in America, what would it look like? Which states would lead the pack? Well, a first glance at the data would suggest a very easy answer. See, after all, the states of California, Florida, Texas, New York, and Ohio have more Englishly descended residents than any other in the nation, but then, of course they do. Those are 5 of the 7 most populated states in America. They have more of just about every group. It's only when you look at English ancestry as a percentage of a state's total population that things get interesting. And if we do that, would any of those 5 states even make the cut? Would your state make the cut? And there's really only one way to find out. Let's take a look at the 5 states with the highest concentration of English ancestry, starting with a not so surprising entry. Of course, it all makes sense. New Hampshire, a state with relatively close proximity to Plymouth Rock, a state named after a county in England, and a state belonging to New England. If there's one state that smells the blood of an Englishman, New Hampshire is totally and utterly a little bit that state. Indeed, New Hampshire's earliest colonial settlers were, of course, chiefly of the English persuasion, with settlers either arriving directly from England or via nearby Connecticut or Massachusetts. Indeed, the first known European to make landfall in the area was the English explorer Martin Pring, of whom no verifiable paintings or sketches remain, the 17th century version of deleting your Instagram. In more recent times though, according to the 2000 census, roughly 18% of New Hampshire residents, that's about 220,000 at the time, self-reported English ancestry, and for perspective, the 45 states behind New Hampshire range from 4.2% to 15.9%. That's right, when it comes to English ancestry, the top 5 were in a league of their own, and given New England's flying start to this video, you could be forgiven for thinking that the region comprises the entire list. Think again. Idaho, the gem state. Its capital of Boise sits more than 2,600 miles from Plymouth, Massachusetts, so how could it be that this state, admitted to the Union in 1890, boasts a higher concentration of English ancestry than 46 other states, not to mention at least 3 in New England? As with New Hampshire, the 2000 census found that roughly 18% of Idahoans self-reported English ancestry, a group that narrowly lost out to the Germans, but then again, we're used to that. German ancestry dominates much much of northern Idaho after German farmers and other industry workers moved into present-day Idaho in the late 19th century. In fact, as recently as World War I, German was the dominant language in the region. But what of the English? How did they come to find themselves in the northern Rockies? Did the English circus make a wrong turn at New York? Well, it turns out there's more than one answer. First of all, thousands of English rode the wave of America's westward expansion in the mid to late 19th century. Southern Idaho was an attractive option for many English settlers because taxation was lower than in their homeland. Oh, the irony. But they also benefited from greater property rights, not to mention awful scenic views like the ones I would photograph 150 years later. Such was the English presence in Idaho that even one of its governors, Frank R. Gooding, was born in England. But financial perks aside, there is one other factor that contributed to the state's English influx: Mormonism. The majority of people converted by the Church of Latter-day Saints came not from American shores, but from Europe. Of those, about half were from England, and while most of those settled in the more abundantly Mormon state of Utah, some opted for the mountains of southeastern Idaho, itself a stronghold of the Mormon corridor. Oh, and while we're on the subject of mountains, Vermont, known as the Green Mountain State due to both the greenliness of its upward terrain and the belief that Vermont, possibly from corrupted French, means Green Mountain. The state bears all the signs of its French past. In addition to the state name, its capital of Montpelier is named for the French city of Montpellier, and the French explorer Samuel de Champlain claimed Vermont as part of New France in 1609. So where did the English come in? Well, in short, English soldiers moved into the region at the start of the 18th century, and 50 years later, New England and New France became globally embroiled in the 7 Years' War. One of the outcomes of this was that France ceded its territory east of the Mississippi River to Great Britain, including present-day Vermont. Eventually, though, after the provinces of New Hampshire and New York threw their toys out of the pram and Vermont's boundaries were set in stone, Vermont became independent in 1777, and its contingent of English settlers remained. This appears to be the driving factor behind the 2000 census finding that 18.4% of Vermont's residents claim English ancestry. Ultimately, the state would see an influx of Irish railroad workers, Scottish quarrymen, and a whole host of European migrants in the ensuing decades, but it remains the third most English state in America, at least if we're talking about ancestry. It's also the one state on this list that I've yet to visit. Our next entry was technically my first. As an 8-year-old boy, I touched down in America for the very first time. Not alone, I was with my parents, obviously. And the place representing my first steps in the new world was the stunning, the captivating, the 8th wonder of the world, Bangor International Airport. It was a pit stop en route to Florida, but I was fortunate enough to visit the state properly in 2004, spending a few days in Portland, where I ate a ukulele, strummed a lobster, and got a little bit merry. But it turns out that other English came before me, about 400 years before me. You see, the short-lived Popham colony, founded by colonist George Popham in 1607, was the first English settlement in present-day Maine, and actually the whole of New England, with Plymouth merely being the first permanent settlement. Either way, prior to its statehood in 1820, the lion's share of Maine's residents were English or of English descent, having poured in from England directly, or via nearby Massachusetts. As of the 2000 census, a staggering 21.5% of Maine's residents self-reported English ancestry, putting it head and shoulders above all but one state. Maine is certifiably English. But which state tops the list? Well, let me give you some clues. It's one of only 17 states where the largest city is also its capital. Its name derives from a native language, and it's one of many states already referenced in this video. I mean, did you not think it was fishy that I kept emphasizing Massachusetts? Well, guess what? That was a red herring, because number one was this. Yes, Utah has the highest concentration of English ancestry in the land. The 2000 census found that almost 30% of the state's residents self-reported English ancestry, with the city of Hilldale boasting more than any other in the nation, a mind-blowing 67%. Indeed, 15 of the 20 most ancestrally English cities in America are located in Utah. And at this point, it probably doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to work out why. As mentioned earlier, in the mid-19th century, shortly after the founding of the Mormon Church, the Mormons sought to convert people not just from the United States, but from Europe. In all, it's believed that around 100,000 newly converted British Mormons set sail across the Atlantic and settled in Utah, and even though I'm not myself a Mormon, one of those people was Eliza Jane Enderby, my second cousin, 4 times removed. And there's something interesting about Utah that perhaps makes its self-reporting more reliable than that of other states. The Mormons are incredibly good at keeping family history records. Indeed, the Family History Library in Salt Lake City is purported to be the world's largest repositories of family history records. Now, while this might account for the state's decisive first-place finish, it might also provide a litmus test for claims that English ancestry in America is underreported. If genealogy was so ingrained into American society as it is into the Mormon community, might states such as Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire come close to rivaling it? Of course, we'll never know, but what is known is that the proliferation of English migrants can be reasonably summed up in this map, detailing the results of the 2000 survey, where the darker colours point to westward expansion, early English settlements, and Mormon converts. You can find a link to it in my description. In the meantime, that's it for this episode. Let me know if your state made the list and whether the English force is strong in your family. Meanwhile, please click the subscribe button to ensure that my Vlogmas videos don't get lost in the pond. A big shout out to all my patrons who make this channel possible. Without you, none of it would be. From the writing, the research, and the luxurious airport layovers. If you would like to become a patron of the channel, you can do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond. All patrons will have access to my secret live stream, and those pledging $5 or more a month will get that, plus my podcast and more. Until next time, whether you're of English descent or otherwise, have yourself a very brilliant day, and tune in again tomorrow. Goodbye. Thank you for watching this episode of Lost in the Pond. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe, and please share this video with the world. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and if you would like to support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond.